Welcome to Alfred Kazin Notes, a place where literature, ideas, and the minds of great writers come alive. Let's explore the thoughts behind the words.
It really is such a privilege to be doing this deep dive today, Sarah.
Same here, Michael. And, today we're looking at something a bit different. We're asking this crazy question. How is it possible that a rural gas station attendant, a guy who literally wore a coat held together with safety pins, how does he die with $8 million in the bank?
Right. Well, a Harvard-educated Wall Street executive, someone with every conceivable advantage, ends up completely bankrupt.
Exactly. And to answer that, we are diving into Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. But listen, we are not looking at this as some standard financial manual.
No, definitely not. There are no budgeting hacks here, no stock-picking formulas or spreadsheets.
Yeah, none of that. Instead, we're treating this text as a profound literary exploration of the human condition, almost like Kazin himself would. We're looking at Housel's insights as parables of the American experience.
Unpacking the historical forces, the deep-seated cognitive biases, and those personal narratives that really shape your financial worldview. Because when you strip away the charts and the jargon, finance isn't a hard science.
Right.
It's a behavioral art. We're conditioned to view money through this lens of pure mathematics, like physics.
Oh, totally. We think of it as these immutable laws, like a bridge holds a certain amount of weight based on gravity and the tensile strength of steel.
Exactly. And human emotion or panic or greed, that doesn't change the structural integrity of that bridge. But financial success operates on an entirely different plane. It's a soft skill.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. When people make financial decisions, they aren't executing elegant formulas in some vacuum. They're sitting at a messy kitchen table. They're carrying the invisible baggage of their childhood.
Their ego, their pride.
Yes, and their desperate desire for security or status. The logic of a spreadsheet is just utterly defenseless against the psychological weight of those deeply human factors.
So the X-ray machine of pure logic is basically broken when it comes to human behavior, which completely flips the script on how we navigate our lives, Your ego dictates your outcomes way more than your intellect.
Or your ability to calculate compound interest.
Right. Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive. We are going to explore the psychological architecture of wealth. And as we do, I want to pose a literary question directly to you, the listener.
It's a great question, too.
If you are the protagonist of your own financial story, are you writing a tragedy of endless ambition, or are you writing a quiet epic of compounding patience?
To even begin answering that, we have to examine those two divergent destinies you mentioned at the start. They perfectly illustrate why money is a behavioral art. Let's look at Ronald Read.
The gas station attendant.
Right. He wasn't a Wall Street financier. He was a janitor and a gas station attendant from rural Vermont, first in his family to graduate high school.
So absolutely no formal financial education whatsoever?
None. Zero. His life was defined by this extreme, unglamorous quietness. I mean, he chopped his own firewood well into his old age.
And famously wore that weathered coat held closed by safety pins.
Yeah, the safety pins.
Yeah.
But he consistently saved what meager wages he could, and he invested them in blue chip stocks.
Which are just shares of massive, historically stable companies, right? Like household names.
Exactly. And then he just left those investments entirely alone for decades. He never touched them. When Ronald Read died at 92 in 2014, he left behind an estate worth $8 million.
Oh, wow.
And he bequeathed the vast majority of it to his local hospital and library.
It's just staggering.
His story is this masterclass in the invisible power of temperament. But to truly feel the weight of it, we have to place it next to its exact opposite, Richard Fuscone.
Ah, right, the Harvard guy.
Yeah. Fuscone was a highly successful executive at Merrill Lynch. He had a Harvard education, an MBA, literally the sharpest financial training in the world.
And probably an insane Rolodex of elite connections.
Oh, absolutely. He achieved such astronomical success in the traditional visible sense that he actually retired in his 40s to become a philanthropist.
But there's a catch.
A massive one. His financial architecture was built on a foundation of heavy leverage. He borrowed huge amounts of money to expand this lavish 18,000 square foot estate in Greenwich, Connecticut.
10,000 square feet.
Yeah, complete with 2 elevators, 2 pools, and get this, a monthly maintenance cost of $90,000.
$90,000 a month just to keep the lights on and the pools clean. That is insane.
And when the 2008 financial crisis struck, that leverage acted as a fatal accelerant. Because leverage, in simple terms, is just using borrowed money to multiply your potential gains.
Right, so if you invest $10 of your own money and borrow 90, a 10% increase in the market doubles your initial $10.
Exactly. But the inescapable, brutal flip side is that a mere 10% drop in the market wipes you out completely. The bank calls in the loan, and your entire portfolio is just vaporized.
Which is exactly what happened to Fuscone.
Yes. The 2008 crisis crushed him. The lavish estate was foreclosed upon, and he was left financially ruined.
I mean, Michael, in what other professional field on earth could a completely uneducated person vastly outperform someone with the highest level of elite institutional training?
Nowhere. You'd never see it.
Right. You would never see Ronald Read perform a more successful open-heart surgery than a Harvard-trained surgeon, or design a more structurally sound skyscraper than a seasoned architect.
Because in those disciplines, technical knowledge is an absolute non-negotiable barrier to entry. But in finance, behavior and temperament completely bypass intelligence.
Which is wild. Fuscone had off-the-charts financial IQ, but his behavioral temperament was fatally flawed by greed and overextension. Read had zero financial IQ, but he possessed this ultimate behavioral temperament. Just unwavering, unbreakable patience.
And that paradox is really the beating heart of Housel's thesis. Technical knowledge is useless if your psychological foundation is brittle. Reed survived because his psychological needs were incredibly small.
Whereas Fuscone was destroyed because his needs, the status of the mansion, the $90,000 burn rate, were just insatiable.
Right. When the storm came, Reed's low profile allowed him to weather it, while Fuscone's massive leverage profile acted like a lightning rod.
Okay, but I have to push back heavily here on Ronald Read as our ideal protagonist.
Okay, go for it.
Is his life actually the one we genuinely want to emulate? Because think about it, if you spend your entire existence mopping floors, pumping gas, freezing in a coat held together by safety pins, and you never actually utilize the millions of dollars you're accumulating, isn't that its own deeply profound tragedy?
That's a very fair point.
I mean, money is merely a utility token, right?
Right.
Its only inherent value is its ability to be exchanged for a better lived experience, for security, for medical care, for joy.
Yeah, the utility of it.
If you hoard those tokens until the day you die and never exchange them for a single moment of comfort, you haven't won the game of finance. You've just died as a very wealthy dragon guarding a pile of gold you never used. What is the point of the wealth if it requires a lifetime of absolute deprivation?
And that tension, Sarah, is exactly why Reed is such a fascinating literary figure in this context. You're highlighting a crucial nuance. Housel does not present Reed as a lifestyle idol.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the mandate for you, the listener, is not to embrace poverty, shiver in a torn coat, and deny yourself every earthly pleasure just to die with a high net worth. Instead, Reed serves as the ultimate archetype of a survival mechanism.
A survival mechanism. I like that.
He's the extreme proof of concept that the psychological tools required to build wealth, humility, the delay of gratification, immunity to social comparison, they are entirely decoupled from your formal education or your pedigree.
So you don't need a Goldman Sachs background to secure your family's future.
Exactly. Reed proves that the barrier to entry for compounding wealth is behavioral, not intellectual. He's a mirror reflecting the sheer power of time and discipline, even if, yes, he took the frugality to a tragic extreme.
Right. The lesson is to adopt his psychological resilience without adopting his physical deprivation. We extract the mechanism of his patience without inheriting his asceticism.
Beautifully put, yes.
But if our financial destinies aren't determined by our intellect or our formal education, we have to ask where our financial wiring actually comes from. Because we aren't born with an innate understanding of asset allocation.
No, we definitely aren't. And this introduces a huge concept from the book. People do crazy things with money, but no one is actually crazy.
I love that line. No one is crazy.
It's so true. Every single financial decision a person makes, no matter how bizarre, irrational, or self-destructive it might look to an outside observer, makes perfect sense to the person making it at the time.
Because it's a completely logical output based on their unique lived experience and the specific historical era they were born into.
Exactly. The mechanism behind this is what Housel calls the 0.0000001% rule.
That's a lot of zeros.
It is. And the premise is mathematically humbling. The personal experiences you have lived through make up roughly that tiny microscopic fraction of what has actually happened in global history.
Right.
Yet, those highly localized experiences account for about 80% of how you construct your model of how the world works.
Because our brains are just evolutionary meaning-making machines, right?
Yeah.
They take whatever immediate data is available in our formative years and hardwire it into absolute truths.
Precisely. And the sources use a stark generational divide as evidence for this. Consider the diary of Benjamin Roth. He was a lawyer who documented the Great Depression in Youngstown, Ohio, back in 1932.
Go.
He recorded the visceral, raw trauma of a collapsed economy. He watched lifelong fortunes evaporate overnight. He saw neighbors lose their homes, banks shutter their doors, ordinary people pushed to the absolute brink of starvation. If your brain's neural pathways were forming during that era, the concept of risk wasn't some mathematical abstraction about portfolio volatility. Risk was the physical threat of starving to death.
Yeah, you contrast that psychological scarring with someone who came of age during, say, the 1990s tech boom or the long bull market of the 2010s.
Completely different universe.
Exactly. If you graduated college in 1995, the stock market taught you that it's just this magical, frictionless machine that simply prints money if you throw cash at it.
Right.
Or look at the 1950s. Adjusted for inflation, the stock market barely moved for an entire decade. It was stagnant. So a young worker in the 1950s learned a profoundly different lesson about the utility of investing than a young worker in the 1970s, an era where the market quadrupled.
Yes, and I love your analogy for this, Sarah.
Oh, the regional accent thing?
Yeah, explain that, because it's perfect.
Well, it's like walking around with a thick regional accent, but assuming you're the only one speaking plain English, you don't realize your financial worldview is entirely regional to the decade you grew up in. It's tied to the socioeconomic status of your parents, the specific economy you graduated into. You just assume your caution or your aggression is the objective truth of the universe.
And this explains the immense friction we see when different generations, or even different individuals, discuss money. The text gives us the hypothetical characters of Alex and Ben.
Right, I remember them.
So Alex grew up in the shadow of a severe financial crisis. Because his formative memories are anchored in economic terror, Alex deliberately hoards 50% of his savings in cash, basically under the mattress.
Which mathematically inflation is just eating away at.
It is. But psychologically, Alex is buying the comfort of absolute security. Now, Ben, conversely, has only ever experienced economic booms. He funnels 90% of his income into aggressive growth stocks because his lived reality dictates that optimism is always rewarded.
So to Ben, Alex is an irrational coward losing money to inflation. And to Alex, Ben is a reckless fool dancing on the edge of a cliff.
Exactly. Neither is biologically crazy. They're simply reading from completely different historical scripts. And when you fully internalize that your financial worldview is just a regional accent, it shatters your arrogance.
It forces empathy.
It really does. You begin to understand why your parents act the way they do with money, why your peers make choices you find baffling. And crucially, it grants you grace for your own past mistakes. You made the best decision you could with the specific worldview your brain had constructed at the time.
And, we also suffer from this acute historical amnesia regarding how incredibly new this entire landscape is.
Oh, definitely.
We treat the management of personal finance, retirement portfolios, and these complex debt instruments as if they are ancient, innate human skills passed down since the Bronze Age.
When they absolutely aren't.
Right. The architecture of modern finance is barely a generation old. For most of human history, retirement didn't even exist. You worked until you physically couldn't, and then you moved in with your kids until you died, which usually wasn't very long after you stopped working.
That was the reality.
The 401k, the absolute bedrock of the American retirement system, wasn't carefully designed by a panel of benevolent economists to secure our futures. It was literally a minor tax loophole discovered in 1978 that accidentally snowballed into our primary retirement vehicle, and the Roth IRA. That didn't even exist until 1998.
Think about that. If the 401k were a human being, it would barely be middle-aged today. It is younger than many of the people trying to use it to retire.
That is wild.
We are an entire society of absolute novices attempting to navigate an unprecedented, wildly complex system. We're trying to process 40-year abstract compounding horizons using brains that evolved on the savannah to survive immediate, short-term resource scarcity.
The evolutionary mismatch is profound.
Exactly. Our biology screams at us to consume the calories immediately, to secure the visible resources today, because tomorrow is entirely uncertain. So when we struggle to delay gratification for a retirement date 3 decades in the future, it isn't because we are inherently flawed or stupid. It's because we are fighting millions of years of evolutionary hardwiring.
Okay, so Our personal histories and our evolutionary biology deeply shape our actions. But even if we somehow overcome all of that, even if we make the mathematically and behaviorally perfect decisions, there are two massive invisible forces that ultimately dictate the outcomes.
The twin siblings of destiny.
Yes, luck and risk. Traditional economics textbooks often ignore them because they cannot be neatly modeled in a formula.
They can't. And Housel aggressively challenges the deeply entrenched American myth of the self-made individual. Our cultural narrative is utterly addicted to the idea that hard work, relentless grind, and sheer brilliance are the sole drivers of success.
And consequently, we attribute all failure to laziness, poor choices, or just a lack of vision.
But that narrative is a comforting fiction. Individual effort is only a fraction of the equation. Every single outcome in your life is heavily influenced by forces completely outside of your control. Luck and risk are fundamentally the exact same force.
They are the reality that the world is too complex to allow 100% of your actions to dictate 100% of your outcomes.
Exactly. They are the same invisible hand, just working in opposite directions. And the text illustrates this with a profoundly moving historical deep dive into the origin story of Bill Gates.
This part was fascinating.
The cultural narrative of Microsoft is entirely focused on Gates's undeniable brilliance, his relentless work ethic, and his visionary foresight. And to be fair, all of those traits were undeniably present.
Of course.
But what gets surgically removed from the myth-making is the staggering statistical anomaly of his luck. In 1968, computers were not consumer products. They were massive room-sized mainframes that cost thousands of dollars an hour to operate. Almost no university students, let alone high schoolers, had access to them.
Right, but Bill Gates happened to attend Lakeside School in Seattle.
And through a bizarre series of events, the Lakeside Mothers Club used the proceeds from a rummage sale to lease a teletype terminal connected to a mainframe.
From a rummage sale.
Yes. So Bill Gates, at 13 years old, had near unlimited access to a computer in 1968. He had the opportunity to hone his programming skills years before almost anyone else of his generation. The mathematical improbability of being placed in that specific room at that specific moment in technological history is a 1 in a million stroke of luck.
The brilliance was necessary, but the luck was the catalyst.
Precisely. And to truly understand the sheer power of these external forces, we have to examine the mirror image of Gates's story, his high school best friend, Ken Evans.
Oh, this was heartbreaking.
It really is. By every historical account, Ken Evans was Gates's equal. He possessed the same towering intellect, the same obsessive passion for computers, and the exact same entrepreneurial drive. They were plotting their future empire together. Evans was subjected to the exact same environment, the exact same teletype machine.
But before graduation, Ken Evans died in a rare mountaineering accident.
He experienced what statisticians call the tail end of risk. In a normal distribution bell curve of possible outcomes, the vast majority of events cluster in the middle, the expected normal occurrences. The tails are the extreme, highly improbable edges of the curve.
So Bill Gates experienced the extreme right tail of positive variance, which is unimaginable luck. And Kent Evans experienced the extreme left tail of negative variance, which is fatal risk.
Yes, he was swept away by the exact same uncontrollable nature of the universe. Kent Evans didn't fail because he was lazy or because he lacked vision or because he made a poor business decision. He failed because a completely random, uncontrollable event ended his life.
Which really shatters the hindsight bias we all walk around with. When we look at successful people, our brains retroactively construct a narrative that makes their success seem inevitable. We completely ignore the invisible wind of luck at their backs.
And when we look at failure, we instinctively search for the character flaw or the bad decision that caused it, ignoring the invisible hand of risk that swept their legs out from under them despite their absolute best efforts.
And this cognitive blind spot is incredibly dangerous when we try to learn from role models. Because we cannot see the luck, we assume that if we perfectly mimic the actions of the hyper-successful, we will achieve their results.
Which is a trap.
But Michael, I have to interject here because this exact realization can induce a paralyzing sense of fatalism.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
If so much of our outcome is dictated by the roll of the cosmic dice, by the tail end of risk, why should you, the listener, even try? Why meticulously save 20% of your income? Why carefully construct a diversified portfolio? Why plan for a future that can be instantly obliterated by a random health crisis, a global pandemic, or a catastrophic market collapse? If risk can simply erase everything, doesn't financial planning become an exercise in futility?
It is the most natural psychological response to recognizing risk. But fatalism is the wrong takeaway. The answer requires shifting our focus away from the extreme outliers and toward broad survivable patterns.
Okay, unpack that.
The mistake is looking at an extreme outlier, like Warren Buffett or Elon Musk,
Yeah.
analyzing their specific, highly concentrated bets and trying to replicate them. You cannot replicate the specific timing, the specific market conditions, or the specific luck they enjoyed.
Mm.
Therefore, trying to emulate their exact tactical moves is a fool's errand.
Right.
Instead, Housel suggests we must emulate the broad behavioral patterns that insulate us from that extreme risk. You focus on what you can control. Humility, maintaining a margin of safety, living below your means, and structural preparedness.
Which loops directly back to Ronald Read and Richard Fuscone.
Exactly.
Fuscone tried to maximize his returns by using leverage, leaving himself a 0% margin of error. When the tail end of risk hit in 2008, he had no shock absorbers, but Read optimized for survival. He lived so far below his means that his margin of safety was enormous.
When market crashes happened, his lifestyle wasn't threatened. He built a financial architecture robust enough to withstand the unpredictable risks, keeping him in the game long enough to eventually catch the upward drift of the market.
Survival is the ultimate metric. Risk is an inescapable ambient reality of the universe. Preparedness and a margin of safety are your only defense mechanisms.
And when you truly comprehend the destructive, unpredictable power of risk, you are forced to confront the single most difficult concept in modern finance.
Knowing when you have enough.
Yes, enough.
Which is a word that completely violates the ethos of modern capitalism. We are transitioning into the tragic flaw of greed and the deeply destructive game of moving the goalposts. Housel asserts that the hardest financial skill in the world is getting the goalpost to stop moving.
It is.
Because if your expectations and your desires rise at the exact same speed or faster than your income, you will never, ever feel wealthy. You are running on a psychological treadmill that only increases in speed the harder you sprint.
It is the ultimate trap of extrinsic motivation. And the book provides a chilling example in the story of Bernie Madoff.
This blew my mind.
Long before he became the architect of the largest Ponzi scheme in human history, Madoff ran a completely legitimate, wildly successful market-making business. By all accounts, his legitimate enterprise was generating $25 to $50 million a year in personal income.
Let that sink in. 25 to 50 million a year. Legally.
He had achieved everything our society tells us to strive for. He was extraordinarily wealthy, universally respected in elite circles, powerful and secure. Yet he deliberately chose to risk absolutely everything, his legacy, his freedom, his family's name, his life, to run a fraudulent scheme for more.
Why? Because the concept of enough just didn't exist in his psychological framework. The goalpost just kept moving. He was comparing his $50 million a year to the billionaires around him, feeling somehow inadequate.
And we see this exact same pathology echoed across generations. Look at the Vanderbilts. In the 19th century, Cornelius Vanderbilt built an incomprehensible empire in shipping and railroads. They were the wealthiest family on the planet. The sheer scale of their capital was staggering.
Yet, within just a few generations, that entire fortune was decimated.
Decimated.
And they didn't lose it in a massive geopolitical collapse. They squandered it on social comparison. They built utterly absurd palatial estates in Newport and New York, not for utility or comfort, but solely to outdo one another and their peers.
They hosted million-dollar parties just to prove they could.
They lived deeply anxious, miserable lives, trapped in the suffocating shadows of their ancestors, desperately trying to validate their worth through conspicuous consumption.
Their wealth became a weapon they used against themselves. The irony, as pointed out in the sources, is that Anderson Cooper, the prominent journalist and direct descendant of the Vanderbilts, he inherited none of that fortune.
None of it.
His mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, made it explicitly clear there was no trust fund waiting for him. And by entirely removing the toxic weight of that legacy, by forcing him to step off the treadmill of comparison, he is seemingly the only Vanderbilt in generations who has lived a self-actualized, independent, and visibly happy life.
He broke the curse because the mechanism of social comparison was severed.
Exactly. Social comparison is a virus.
It really is. I mean, Housel tells this story from his time working as a hotel valet in Los Angeles during his college years that perfectly encapsulates this sickness.
Oh, the gold coins. Tell this one.
Okay, so he observed a regular patron, a tech millionaire, who had struck it rich in the late 90s. This man would frequently hand the valets thick wads of cash, literally thousands of dollars, and instruct them to run down the street to a jewelry store to purchase solid gold coins.
Just casually sending a valet for gold.
Right. Then this millionaire and his entourage would stand on the beach and physically skip these solid gold coins across the surface of the Pacific Ocean.
It's so insane.
They were literally throwing gold into the sea, not for charity, not for investment, but just for laughs, just to visibly demonstrate to everyone around them that they possess so much capital they could afford to treat it like skipping stones.
It is the absolute pinnacle of financial absurdity.
Hmm.
And it's driven entirely by the need for an audience.
Exactly. But the punchline of the story is inevitable. Years later, Housel learned that this same tech millionaire had gone entirely bankrupt. He lost every single cent.
Of course he did.
Pursuing wealth purely for the sake of status and social comparison is like drinking salt water when you are dying of thirst. The more you consume, the more you desperately try to quench that internal void with external validation, the more dehydrated, frantic, and empty you become. It is a biological certainty that it will kill you.
The fatal flaw uniting Madoff, the Vanderbilts, and the coin-skipping millionaire is their reliance on extrinsic motivation. They were utilizing money not as a foundational tool to secure their autonomy, but as a yardstick to measure their worth against strangers.
It's a game with no end.
Exactly. Playing a game where the only victory condition is having more than the person next to you is a game that literally has no finish line. There is always a bigger boat. There is always a faster car. There's always a newer billionaire. If your drive is extrinsic fueled by status and the desperate need to impress, it will eventually lead you to taking fatal risks. But if your motivation is intrinsic driven by an internal desire for security, peace of mind, and time, it is sustainable. You can actually win the game because you define the finish line.
Which begs the question, if throwing gold coins into the ocean isn't true wealth, and if building an 18,000 square foot mansion just leads to foreclosure and anxiety, how do we systematically redefine what wealth actually is?
We have to untangle the semantic yet profoundly psychological difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Our culture uses these two words completely interchangeably, but they represent entirely different states of being.
Let's define them through House's framework. Being rich is a current state of income. It is highly visible. It is loud. If you see someone driving a $100,000 Ferrari, you know they are rich.
Right. They either had the liquid cash to purchase that vehicle, or they had the income necessary to secure the massive monthly debt payment.
Exactly. We are bombarded with symbols of being rich every single day. It's the designer clothes, the luxury watches, the curated vacation photos on social media. Rich is the explicit demonstration of purchasing power.
And wealth.
Wealth is precisely what you do not see. Wealth is the $100,000 Ferrari that was not purchased. It is the first-class ticket downgraded to economy, the luxury watch left in the display case.
I love that.
Wealth represents financial assets that have not yet been converted into visible material goods. Wealth is the money sitting quietly in an index fund, compounding year after year. Wealth is the paid-off mortgage. Wealth is the flexibility to quit a toxic job without panic. Wealth is silent, invisible, and deeply internal.
But that distinction requires a massive rewiring of our brains, because our entire macroeconomic system is aggressively geared toward convincing us to showcase how rich we are.
It really is.
And Housel captures the tragedy of this endless performance in a concept he calls the man-in-the-car paradox.
This is one of my favorite parts of the book.
So imagine you are walking down a busy street, and a brand new, roaring, $250,000 sports car pulls up to the stoplight next to you. When you look at that magnificent machine, what is the actual dialogue running through your head?
Be honest.
Right. You almost never look at the person behind the wheel and think, wow, the guy driving that car is so incredibly cool. I deeply respect and admire him as a human being. No. You ignore the driver entirely. You subconsciously erase him from the picture.
You do.
You imagine yourself sitting in the driver's seat. You imagine how incredibly cool and respected everyone else would think you were if you were the one driving that car.
The driver thinks he has purchased admiration, but he has actually just purchased a very expensive prop. People do not use your visible wealth to admire you. They use your visible wealth as a mirror for their own desires. They project their own fantasies of status onto your objects, completely ignoring your humanity in the process.
You spend a fortune to be the star of the show, but you are actually just an extra in everyone else's fantasy.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If your entire strategy for spending money on depreciating, flashy assets is to gain the respect and admiration of your peers, You are executing a mathematically and psychologically failed strategy. True respect and genuine admiration cannot be financed at a dealership. They are earned through character, through empathy, through the value you provide to others.
And to expose just how much of our financial lives are a theatrical performance, the sources introduce a brilliant thought experiment, the deserted island test.
Oh, right.
Let's imagine you were relocated to an island or a distant planet where you lived a perfectly comfortable life, but you were entirely alone. Or simply imagine a world where absolutely no one else could ever see your house, your clothes, the car you drive, or the watch you wear. There is no audience, no one to impress.
Okay.
If you lived in that reality, how drastically would your spending habits shift? Without the extrinsic pressure of an audience, would you still desire the massive mansion? Or would you suddenly prefer something cozy, functional, and easy to clean?
Would you still care about the designer label on your jacket if there was no one to read it?
Exactly. It strips away the toxic layer of social comparison and leaves only the intrinsic utility of the object.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question. If true wealth is simply the money you don't spend, if it is just invisible numbers sitting in a brokerage account, what is its actual tangible purpose? Why bother denying yourself the Ferrari? Why accumulate an invisible asset that you can never show off at a dinner party?
Because the highest possible dividend that money pays has nothing to do with material goods. The highest dividend money pays is the ability to control your own time.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Autonomy.
The unadulterated ability to wake up every single morning and declare, I can do whatever I want today. To do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want.
That is the universal intrinsic human desire.
It's the only metric of true wealth that actually correlates with sustained happiness.
And the text highlights this dichotomy beautifully by contrasting two hypothetical people. By pure coincidence, they are actually named Michael and Sarah in the outline of the book's examples.
Huh. Well, it works. Let's look at them.
Okay, so both of them earn exactly $100,000 a year. Michael is heavily driven by extrinsic status. He leases the luxury car, he rents the high-end apartment in the trendy neighborhood, he eats at the finest restaurants, and he wears the designer labels.
He's living large.
Right. He spends roughly $99,000 of his $100,000 income just to maintain this highly visible, rich lifestyle. To everyone passing him on the street, Michael looks incredibly successful.
But structurally, he is a prisoner. He is entirely dependent on his next paycheck to keep the facade from collapsing. He has zero autonomy. If his boss demands he work the weekend, he must comply. If the company pivots in a direction he finds unethical, he cannot afford to resign. His visible wealth has purchased his servitude.
Now look at Sarah. Sarah also earns $100,000, but her psychological architecture is driven by intrinsic security. She consciously chooses to live on $60,000 a year. She drives a reliable 5-year-old car. Her apartment is modest.
To the outside observer, Sarah looks far less successful than Michael.
Exactly. But Sarah is taking that $40,000 difference every single year and hoarding it as invisible wealth. She is buying assets. Over a decade, that unspent money snowballs into a massive investment portfolio.
And what does that invisible portfolio actually buy her? It buys her independence. It buys her the psychological armor to say no to a demanding boss. It buys her the freedom to take a 6-month sabbatical if she burns out, to start her own business, or to care for a sick family member without facing financial ruin. She has literally purchased her own life back.
But Michael, I have to play devil's advocate here again because this flies in the face of what the financial optimization industry screams at us every single day.
I know, the optimization trap.
Right. We are constantly told by gurus and analysts that we need to make our money work for us.
Sure.
We are instructed to maximize our returns, optimize our portfolios down to the decimal point, and use low-interest debt to leverage real estate empires.
Sure.
If Sarah is just keeping a massive chunk of her money sitting safely in cash or low-yield bonds simply because she wants to feel secure, isn't she actively losing purchasing power to inflation? Shouldn't we strive to be perfectly rational, unemotional investors who mathematically maximize every single dollar we earn?
That is the standard critique from traditional finance, absolutely. But Housel dismantles it by introducing one of his most profound principles. Reasonable is greater than rational.
Reasonable is greater than rational.
Yes. Traditional financial theory assumes you are a perfectly rational, emotionless algorithm. It tells you to always seek the absolute highest mathematical return, regardless of volatility. But as we established at the beginning of our deep dive, You are not a spreadsheet.
You are a deeply flawed, emotional human being whose brain is highly reactive to stress.
A mathematically rational, perfectly optimized strategy is entirely useless if the day-to-day volatility of that strategy causes you so much chronic anxiety that you panic, capitulate, and sell all your assets at the absolute bottom of a market crash.
So a suboptimal strategy you can stick with is vastly superior to a perfect strategy you abandon when you get scared.
Precisely. It is infinitely better to adopt a financial strategy that allows you to sleep peacefully at night, even if it leaves some mathematical returns on the table. Let's look at paying off a mortgage early.
Okay.
If you have a 30-year mortgage fixed at a 3% interest rate, any financial advisor will tell you that mathematically, paying it off early is a terrible decision. Rationally, you should take any extra cash and invest it in the stock market, which historically returns much more than 3%.
Right, that's the standard advice.
But reasonably. If writing that final check to the bank and owning your home outright gives you a profound, unshakable peace of mind, if it removes a layer of existential dread from your daily life, then it is the absolutely correct decision for you.
Because keeping a larger cash buffer than strictly necessary might mean losing a few percentage points to inflation over time. But if that cash buffer prevents you from making a panic-driven, catastrophic mistake during a recession, because you know you can pay your rent for a year, that cash has earned an immeasurable psychological return.
It all circles back to the concept of survival that we discussed with Ronald Read. And there is no greater example of compounding and survival in the financial universe than Warren Buffett.
Oh, of course.
We all know his name. We all know he's one of the wealthiest humans to ever exist. But the deep dive reveals a statistic about his wealth that completely short-circuits the human brain. 99% of Warren Buffett's wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
Let the sheer math of that sink in. 99%.
We attribute his success to his stock-picking genius, his ability to read balance sheets, his business acumen, and look, those skills are undeniably elite. But his true, underlying secret weapon is the unbroken application of time.
He began investing when he was 10 years old.
Yes. If Warren Buffett had started investing in his 30s and retired at 60 to play golf, like a normal person, you would have never heard his name. He would have been a mildly successful, wealthy guy in Omaha, but he would not be a global titan.
The secret wasn't just that he achieved high annualized returns. The secret was that he survived.
He didn't burn out. He didn't over-leverage his portfolio during the euphoria of the dot-com bubble. He didn't panic and liquidate his holdings during the stagflation of the 1970s or the crash of 2008. He stayed unbroken.
He remained in the game, compounding his capital for 3/4 of a century. The astronomical, multi-billion-dollar results we see today are simply the mathematical reality of a snowball rolling down a very, very long hill.
He didn't build a financial architecture designed for maximum short-term speed. He built an architecture designed for absolute, unkillable longevity. He survived long enough for the math to do the heavy lifting.
Which is the ultimate lesson for the listener. You don't need to be a financial genius. You don't need to predict the next macroeconomic shift or find the next tech unicorn. You need to be deeply self-aware.
You need to understand your own cognitive biases, recognize the invisible hands of luck and risk, firmly define what enough means to you, and build a life that prioritizes your autonomy over the fleeting validation of status.
When we look at the entire scope of this deep dive, Michael, from the quiet patience of a Vermont janitor to the tragic hubris of the Vanderbilts, the narrative is clear. Money is deeply, inextricably emotional.
It is a mirror reflecting the historical eras we happen to be born into, the generational traumas we inherit, and the cognitive biases we blindly carry. It is a fragile landscape, constantly threatened by the twin forces of unpredictable risk and our own insatiable egos.
And the most empowering takeaway from Housel's work is the realization that your financial life is not an IQ test. It is a test of character. It is a test of your ability to understand yourself and master your own desires.
We started this deep dive by acknowledging that the X-ray machine of pure logic is broken when applied to human behavior. We cannot spreadsheet our way to happiness.
The goal is not to accumulate gold coins to skip across the ocean or to buy a depreciating luxury car to act as a prop in a stranger's fantasy at a stoplight.
The ultimate goal of accumulating wealth is to buy back your own time, to secure your independence, and to ensure you are the undisputed author of your own days.
As we close the book on Morgan Housel's exploration of our financial psychology, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to mull over. We've established that true wealth is completely invisible, and that the greatest dividends it can possibly pay are silence, autonomy, and peace of mind. So look critically at your own life. Look at the objects you buy, the stress you willingly shoulder, the treadmill you are exhausting yourself on. What part of your current financial life are you performing purely for an audience that isn't even watching?